Hello and welcome to the hint video for Project 4. This is probably going to be a multi-part uh, video series. So let's just get started with my form. I have the same setup that they have on page 265 of the text. Now remember that I've gone in and named all these appropriately. You want to make sure that you use what I've shown in my little chapter 1, project 1 video. I kind of showed you, I've got a list of how all this stuff works, and I explain that. Rather than redo it and waste a bunch of time on it, you can always go back to project 1 and rewatch it. But one thing I wanted to indicate to you here is how to set the tab order of these things. And I just went to view and then selected tab order. Now notice that I've got the labels. If this label is associated with this text box, I set it to 0 and then set this to 1, or it could be 5 and 6 as long as the text box is 1 higher. And what that means is labels cannot accept focus like a text box can or a list box. Focus means it's ready to accept some sort of input. So when the tab order begins, like when the form is loaded or somebody's hitting the tab key, if it hasn't set it to anything in particular, like the user hasn't clicked on anything, what will happen is this label will try to accept focus. Well, it can't. So it automatically throws it to the next object in the tab order, which is the text box. That's why it's 0 and 1. And you can see what I've done here. And I've got 6 and 7. So I just want to indicate that that's something you need to look at. And that's going to change depending on what order you put things in. And they're not always going to be in the right order. You have to go in and actually set it and think about how you want it to work. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And let's see if everything's working out the way it's supposed to. Okay, so there's my distance converter. The text, as you can see, the text box says focus. If I hit tab, it's going to go through different things. Now notice that I've got the convert grayed out. I'll explain that in a minute. I'm working on a new computer with some new software here, so bear with me if I make some mistakes. I set the enable property to false on this because I'm trying to set it up so that I can limit the amount of mistakes the user can make. For example, if they don't have anything selected in here and you try to start grabbing these items, it's going to throw an error. It's going to throw an exception. If they don't have anything in the text box and you start trying to convert numbers and things like that, it's going to throw an exception. So the easiest way to fix this to start with is not 100%, is to go ahead and disable the buttons you don't want them to click until they put something in this text box. Now, before we do that, you'll notice I don't have any items as default selected in the from and the to list, so I'm going to do that in the form load event. So I need to create a form load event. If it's a default event for an object, of course you can always come over here and select the events list and pick whichever one you want for an object. It'll show you everything. But if it's a default event, like a button, the default event's a click event handler. If it's a form, it's form load. Well, I want to set these to what's in the book before the form loads. And the reason for that is there needs to be something selected so I don't have to deal with that in code, right? It's just easier that way. So I'm going to double click on this and it should take me into code behind or code view and put that event handler in there, which it didn't do for some reason. It put it in there, but it didn't take me to code view. So what I want to do is, let me go back to design real quick and explain something to you. List boxes are collections of items, almost like an array, and very much like an array. Probably behind the scenes, that's what it is an array of strings. But because it's like an array, the first item in the list is going to be at index 0. The second item will be at index 1. The third item at index 2, because you're always off by 1. If you go back in your 150 class and remember arrays and indices and how you address them, that's exactly what's going on. So now that you know that, if you look on the page 265, you'll see that feet is selected in the from list. So I'm going to go ahead. Oops. And in my list, I'm going to do a selected index. You can also do a selected item and put the text in there. I'm just used to doing it this way. There are a bunch of different ways to do just about anything. We want feet, and so that's at index 1. That's why I'm setting it that way. Now I'm going to go over to the to list And if I could type, darn it. I'm working on 2017 here. It's a little bit different probably than what you're used to seeing. Not much, but a little bit. List. I've done something. Bear with me just a minute. Two units. There it is. Dot selected index. And I'll set that equal to 0 because that's the first item in the list, which is inches. All right, so let's save it, run it, and see what happens. And there they are. Okay. Now, what about this convert button here? Well, I want to make sure that there's something in this text box before I enable this. And a good way to do that, I also need to code the exit button here, is to create an event for that text box called text changed. And every time they press a key on the keyboard, it's going to examine what's in there. All right. And that's the default event, so I'm going to double click it. Oh, this thing's not going back the way it's supposed to. Something I'm doing, I'm sure. Maybe it's this recording software. All right, so it's created an event handler called text changed. And what I want to do is use an if statement, and I want to examine that text and see if there's anything in there. Now, how do you do that? Well, if text distance dot text is dot length, so that's the number of characters, is greater than 0, then we have something in there. Now, you could do a little bit more to this. You could change the you could trim spaces off of it and stuff like that. I don't really care in this example. I'm just trying to show you some of the things to think about. Well, if it's not greater than 0, it has to be 0, which means there's no characters in there. So what are we doing here? All right, so if there's something in there, I want to enable that button. So it's btn convert dot enabled, and that is a Boolean value. So it's either true or false. It's either enabled or it's not enabled. So that means there's something in there. If there's nothing in there, then I'm going to disable it or set enable to false. Okay, so that's what I want to do. All right, save it, run it, see what we get here. All right, notice it's disabled, so if I put, now it doesn't care what goes in there, we're going to take care of that elsewhere, but this kind of sets it up. So if I put data that's not going to convert to a number, it doesn't care. All it's doing is toggling the enable property. See that? Okay, so that sets it up to where they can't bang on it if there's nothing in here. All right, that's basically what that is. That's all that does. Let me go back over here and let's code the exit button. The default event is click. Why it's not going to code view? That's weird. It's got to be that software that I'm using to record with. Yours should go back to code view every time you do that. And it's this dot close. That ends the application. Right? Now again, if you need some reinforcement, you need to go back to that first project because I talk about a lot of stuff in there that's relevant. All right. Now, let's go in and start looking at a couple of things before I end this first part. Let's set up a click event handler for the convert button. That's where all the work's going to be. All right, so there it is. It created that. Now, I don't know if we've talked about exception handling, but we need to go ahead and discuss it. I think it's already been talked about, but if it's not, you'll see it. And it's really simple. Anytime you do anything with math or open files or hit the internet, or you do something that may throw an error, your application needs to handle that error or that exception, because if you don't handle it at the application level, Windows will end your application probably and throw up the crazy hex code, and if their users typed in a bunch of data and it does that, they're not going to be happy with you. So this will elegantly stop handle the exception, and you can do different things, display messages or whatever. This is called a try catch block. All right, so it's the word try. So whatever you're going to try, to do, well, that's not real good. Hang on just a minute. You put it inside this try block, and there's always a catch block, hopefully. So all my code that I'm going to be using to try to do my calculations will be in there. And then you need a catch. This will catch the exception, and there's an exception object that's built into this. So the actual object's called exception, and I'm going to call mine EX. That's just a child, so it's inheriting all the properties from the exception object. And there's a bunch of them. There's messages, and you can deduce a lot of different things. All right. Okay, so that's basically what's going to happen. So if I have an error, I need to do something. So I'm going to put up a message box here, dot show, which we've done before, and just put error. I could actually put the, let's do this. Let's do, whoops. You may not need to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it's ex dot, whoops, message, I think. There it is. I think I could do it like this, just toString. Yeah, I can do it like that. Some of these already have that built in, so I'm going to take this out. We don't need to do convert here. And we'll see what it displays. Sometimes it doesn't make any sense. And sometimes it does. We'll find out. You can put your own, and I can put error, input, error, and whatever. Now, there's only one place that they can actually type anything here. So that's that text box. So what we want to do then, if we've gotten down into this catch exception, we want to throw the focus back to that text box, which is what you should always be thinking about. What's the user going to do? If I put the cursor there, it just saves them a step. And I could also select the text in there so that they could overtype it. There's a lot of different things you could do. Let's do that. So it's text distance dot focus. Now, IntelliSense will show you all the methods and properties. If you type in a valid name, you'll get this list, and that helps a lot of times if you don't know what to do. But Google is your friend, so that's how I learned all this stuff. Just trial and error. Focus. I don't know if that's a method or a property. Yeah, it's a method. And then I could do a select all here and just select all the text in that box. Select next. Select all. There it is. And that will select everything in that box. Okay. Well, let's see. What else do we need? Well, let's go back and let's save this. Let's go back to our form. I need a variable because this can be a double number. It can be a float. And all that means is it has a decimal component. It can be like 10.5 feet. So it wouldn't be an integer necessarily. So I'm going to go in here and create a double variable. And I'll call it DBL, that's the prefix, and I'll call it distance to convert. That's a little bit verbose, but so be it. And initialize to 0.0. All right, so now what we need to do is, now that all the green squiggly line means is that's a warning. I haven't used it yet, but I'm going to, so I ignore that most of the time. What I need to do is I need to grab the text that they've typed in because it's going to be a type string when it goes into that text property. But I've got to convert it to a number if it's convertible before I can do anything to it. And we're going to be doing some math conversions. So what I want to do here is I want to grab that and make an assignment here. Oops. Eventually get my stuff together. Equals text distance dot text. Now that won't work. And the reason it won't work is because if you think back to your variables and memory locations and all that in your logic class, you can't pull something out of memory that is of text or string and stick it into a memory location that is expecting a number. You can't do that. That's apples to oranges. So we can do a convert, use a convert method, which is an intrinsic object. It's built in. There are other ways to do it. I just used to this. Convert dot to double. So I'm converting it to a double, if it will convert to a double, because that's where I'm putting it, right? See that? That's going into a double right there. And I'm pulling the text out, the string out of the text property, and I'm converting it to a double. Now, if that doesn't convert to a double, it's going to throw an exception. It'll come down here and do this. So what I'm going to do is save it and run it. And we're about to end part 1. I'm going to put A in there. That won't convert to a number. I mean, you could conceivably convert it to an ASCII value, but that would be totally ridiculous in this scenario. So let's see what happens when I hit the convert button. All right, so here's what it said. This is the default message that came from the exception object. Input string was not of the correct format. I don't know if that makes sense or not. You could have put input error. Please try enter a decimal number from whatever, something in there that might make a little more sense. I'll leave it as that, but for now I guess that's good enough. Let's run it again. This time let's put a actual number in there. It didn't do anything, and the reason it didn't do anything is because it didn't throw an exception. The only code I've got here is just converting it, if it will convert, and storing it in here. So I put a breakpoint here. Let's run it. I'm about to end this part here again, and let's put a number in there, 1. All right, that hits the breakpoint, stops, and down here it shows you everything. So it hasn't put a value in there yet because it hasn't executed this line of code. So to do that, you press F10, and if you'll notice now, I have a distance convert 1, which is a number, and we don't have an error, so it's just going to finish, and that's going to be it. All right, so that's good. Exit, and I'll press F5 to run to the end. You should really get in the habit of putting breakpoints in your code. It's really important. I mean, I could not write anything without it. All right, so that ends part 1, and we'll start looking at the logic for the program in part 2, and I'll see you then. Sample recording, test 1, 2, check 1.